Welcome back to Identity Stack. This is Dr. Sarah Austin, Content Lead at KeyData Cyber. This time, I'm thrilled to be joined by Jonathan Edwards, Managing Director at KeyData Cyber, to talk about identity-driven revenue. Thank you so much for joining me, Jonathan.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for having time to chat with me today.
For sure. So before we dive in, let's get to know you. Can you introduce yourself and tell us about your background and experience?
Absolutely. I'm not going to give you the whole play-by-play or year-by-year history of myself, but what I'll say is that I've been extremely lucky in my career to have had a wide range of diverse experiences, not only from the technology perspective and industries that I've worked in, but also from a geographical location. I've been really lucky and blessed to have worked and lived around the world. I've worked in the US and Canada, Germany, and the UK, all of which have really taught me a lot about understanding the differences that we have in our business ideologies. From a career perspective, I've worked from some well-known companies like Bloomberg as an example, but the majority of my career has really been in the consulting space. I've been in identity, I want to say probably around 2 decades now. I started as a developer. I opened up some new business units in different countries and grew them. I joined an early stage startup organization and took it to acquisition. And then prior to joining here at KeyData Cyber, I was the CEO of the company that acquired us. What that's done is it's really given me a unique perspective on business, not only from a local perspective, but also globally. And it also allows me to understand, so many different aspects of technology, but looking at it from the lens from a business perspective as well.
That's a perfect segue, actually, since we're here to talk about something that is important to both security teams and executive leaders, how identity security can be a powerful revenue driver. Can you unpack that a bit? What does it mean to drive revenue with identity?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think to answer that, we really need to take a step back and define what identity is. I would say, generally speaking, when people in our industry are talking about identity, they're generally talking about identity and access management or identity security. But what really is identity? And from my perspective, identity is a set of attributes, behaviors, characteristics, a bunch of other things that represent an entity. And that entity could be a human or it could be a non-human. And specifically in today's world, where there's AI and bots that make up our networks. But if I take those features, yes, can I use them to secure those entities? Absolutely, and that's identity-driven security. But what about identity-based sales or identity-based marketing or even identity-based preferences? Yeah, my point really is that identity is the foundation of all this. And we as identity professionals really need to step away from this label that we've created of identity security or identity-based security to really show the value that identity can bring to an organization.
So where did this view on identity come from?
Well, I guess if you go back a few decades, dinosaurs are roaming the earth. There was a perception that IT was just a bunch of people who sat in the basement. No one really knew what they did, right? And at times they were considered basically a bit of a money pit. We're spending millions of dollars on these people, and what are we getting? And I think that's how most people really saw the IT or the IS departments in their organization. However, at some point, the IT managers, and people who are responsible for IT, learned about chargebacks and showbacks. And once they did, they realized, well, IT is actually providing services that support the business. And we went from being this quote unquote this money pit to being a business enabler, and in some cases, even a business unit. And I believe that security is at that point right now. And if you believe that identity is the foundation of security, which based on the things I've said before, I obviously think that, it's important to look at identity in business terms. But too many times we hear what the vendors are telling us. And the vendors are selling the solutions based on fear and as if they're selling insurance to us. And the customer, who doesn't know any better sometimes or isn't educated, then parrots what the vendor tells them. Well, let's be honest, the executives and boards, they're generally not concerned about buying insurance policies. Yes, they have to buy insurance policies for their organization, but they're really concerned about how do I improve top and bottom line revenue. And far too often, we focus only on the bottom. And I think it's time that we change that narrative and we talk about both bottom and the top.
So could you provide some examples?
There are tons. I'll give ones that I think are easy to kind of understand where my thought process is coming from. And again, these aren't limited to what is out there. But the first is the CRM model. I think a lot of people are familiar with Salesforce and other solutions around that. But assume that you're a holding or say a franchise company. You own 3 or 4 fast food restaurant brands. Being able to have a loyalty program that work together across those brands can drive customers to consume or use more of your products. It also can lend itself to building patterns what people are buying, which can lead to targeted marketing as an example. Another example would be M&A. A lot of times in the M&A world, we talk about the ROI when it comes to identity. And the reason being is that, I think the number was about 7% of the original acquisition cost is what it costs an organization to onboard a new company. So if you're able to reduce that cost, makes it easier to onboard, then obviously you're saving money and therefore you're getting a really good return on your investment. However, being able to onboard those companies faster, really where I see the benefit is how do I provide those services faster to those customers at the new company that I acquired? And with identity, you can do that. And to me, that is really thinking about it from a revenue perspective versus just a operational and return on investment perspective. So, there's many examples that I can point to, but it's really about changing the way that we think about identity the way we did before.
So in this context, are the buyers the same as they were before? Is it still the CISO, the CIO, and the CTO?
So the simple answer is yes and no. Obviously, the CISO specifically is still heavily involved because of the security play with these solutions. However, we are seeing more CMOs and marketing focused parts of the organization purchasing identity solutions completely separate from security. The fact is that these solutions are solving business problems and not only security problems. But where we have a problem is that we security people don't have the business acumen to have some of these conversations that are coming up. And therefore, we're trying to sell security solutions to business people and not really talking the same language. So there is some education that we need to do on both sides. But we are seeing to answer the question, we are seeing a broader scope of buyers in the space.
So how are you getting the message out to the industry?
Yeah, this is a difficult one. If you go back a few years, there's podcasts of me speaking about this, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was having these conversations. And I'm only one person. The industry is pretty hell-bent right now on this insurance model message, or I call it fear-mongering a little bit. However, there are some vendors and some thought leaders that are starting to get on board with this message. I'm currently working with a well-known software vendor who focuses specifically on customer identity. And although what I'm talking about primarily has a customer tilt, this also affects workforce as well. But the company that I'm working with is specifically focused in customer identity. And we're going to be coming out with an offering that allows us to build a benchmark for organizations of where their organization is using identity in relation to driving revenue and growth. It'll also provide some analysis on how much revenue is being left on the table. And this can justify additional spend to improve what I'm calling the identity revenue posture, as well as build a roadmap with clear action items both with solutions and even improving internal processes.
Jonathan, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. And to our listeners, if you want to learn more about driving revenue with identity, be sure to visit us at keydatacyber.com, where you can schedule a complimentary workshop to assess your security needs and receive a roadmap to a secure, scalable IAM strategy for your organization.